We will start in 2 minutes. Okay, I guess that will be all, so we can start. Firstly, I would like to introduce the program. Today we gathered in this team for the first talks of Hevsel Press. Our guest of honor is Dr. Waugh, the professor as associate professor of psychology in Wake Forest University. We would like to say welcome and it's an honor to host you here. So today, Dr. Waugh will introduce him, and then we prepared a bunch of questions for him as a Hevsel Press. Now we will ask them, and it will be kind of a Q&A talk. And then the participants may ask some questions if they have. So I'm directing the word to Dr. Waugh to introduce you for us.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome. What time is it there, out of curiosity?
It's around 10 p.m.
About 10, so so it's a little bit later in the day. I appreciate you staying with me. Although, you know, that might be like the peak of when you're awake, right? Yeah. 10 p.m. I'd be in bed already. So my name is Christian Waugh. I've been a psychology professor at Wake Forest since 2010. I started off my sort of academic journey to psychology at William & Mary, which is a university in Virginia here, where I really just fell in love with psychology and learning about it. And then I went to grad school at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where I learned, I got a degree in social psychology, which is, as you probably know, just the study of people and how people interact with each other, but also a little bit of that was emotions. That was the part I was really interested in. And I left there, and while there I did work in like resilience, how people are resilient, and positive emotions, what those are and how useful those can be. And I also learned a little bit about neuroimaging, so looking at the brain while we have emotions. Then I went to Stanford University in the West Coast for a postdoc. And a postdoc is when it's sort of like being a teenager, you know, like when you like graduate from grad school and you're not quite a grown-up yet. So you do a postdoc to kind of get a job, get more experience, and before you become a professor. So I was there for 4 years, and I've been Wake Forest ever since. So that's me. What else do you want to know?
Yeah, that was so inspiring, actually. I think that's all we need to know about you.
Oh, all you need to know. Okay, bye.
Yeah.
That was fast.
Yeah, I guess we can move to the questions. We prepared a bunch of questions which are about science of psychology, the Wake Forest University, and specifically for you. And I'm giving word to Pelisi for the first question.
Yeah. So I would like to ask you that, as you might know, maybe recent books, TV series, movies, YouTube videos, etc., show us like how most people love to actually engage in psychology. But like, is it actually healthy for the science of psychology to be the topic of these products? Like, you know, after all, people read and watch these and use them as sources, and can this cause any problems in our society? What do you think?
That is a beautiful question. I love that question. I always say that one of the benefits of teaching psychology is that when people walk in my door, my classroom, they are inherently already interested in it, right? Because we are inherently already interested in each other. Like, what is it about people? Why do they do this thing? Like, what? Let me figure out this. How can I convince this person to do this thing? What are they feeling and why are they feeling that way? How do I change my own feelings? So that is a benefit, right? So people are inherently interested in it. So we talk to people, and a lot of people show up at my seminars and stuff like that. And in the press, they love talking about it, and because they know that people are interested in it. I think there's always a benefit to people being interested in the topic that you're discussing. Of course, what you're highlighting is some of the drawbacks, right? And this goes with basically anything. The drawback of being inherently interested in psychology is sometimes we don't think critically enough about something, especially if it makes sense. And this is sort of an ironic thing, right? Which is, if I tell you something and it makes sense to you, you'll assume that it's true because it's consistent with what you believe in your own head, right? But here's the trick though, right? Is that you now, even as you're all high school students, right? Yeah. So even as high school students, you've had enough experience in your life where you know this person, you know that person, you've had that thought, you know that thought, you've had this emotion, you had an experience in your life that I can pretty much tell you anything, and it would probably make sense to you because you can point out, oh yeah, because that one guy I knew that one time did that thing. That makes sense. And then boom, I'm telling the truth to you, right? And you don't question it. So you're 100% right, which is it is a great thing to be interested in this topic. And I think more people honestly should be interested in the science of psychology. But it is a critical thing with all information, including psychology, any other sciences, and any other information, to always think critically about where it's coming from, always verify that whether this is the case or not, and just be skeptical. Always have a healthy dose of skepticism. Always say, is that really so? Is that really so? Especially if you agree with it, because those are the times where you're most vulnerable to being persuaded that something may be true when it may not be. So that's a brilliant question. That's exactly the right attitude to have. Be a little bit skeptical, but stay interested.
So much for the answer.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question will come from Hiva.
Hello.
Hi.
Let's when we breathe dust, we may sneeze, or when something comes to us, we close our eyes. These are physical reflexes, but is there any psychological reflex that our mind uses to protect our mental health?
Oh, yeah, great question. So let's start with what a reflex is, and I apologize if you already know this, but a reflex in a very physical sense is defined by the input neuron connecting to the spine, directly connecting to an output neuron, right? So that's why it's a reflex, because the input neuron, spine, to output neuron doesn't involve your brain. Okay, that's a reflex. That's a physical reflex. And the reason why I define that is that psychology necessarily involves your brain. Necessarily, by definition, right? It involves the brain. Okay, so there is not technically a psychological reflex. So that's really important to get out of the way right off the bat. There's not technically a psychological reflex. So we use that word a little bit misleadingly, and I'll tell you why. Because that reflex, because that physical reflex, because it does not involve your brain, you can't control it. You can't learn anything that'll change it. You know, like so, like you have the reflex with your knee, right, where you hit the patellar tendon and your leg goes woo woo. You know that woo, right? Woo, like that. You can't. If I told you right now, I want you to spend the next 6 months training to change that, like mentally training to change that, you couldn't do it because it doesn't involve your brain. Okay. Now, when we talk about psychological reflexes, what people are usually talking about are unconscious, automatic sort of responses to stimuli in the environment. Okay. Here's the funny part about that. Most of our responses to the environment are unconscious. A very, 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 very large percentage of the time. We only become conscious of things when it's like we're putting our attention on it and it's particularly important or it's weird or new or whatever. But our conscious cannot handle all the information that it needs to process. So in fact, the answer to the question is, in a way, yeah, we always, every day, all of us, all the time, rely on psychological unconscious processes to protect our mental health, to adapt to different circumstances, to enact goals and all sorts of things. A lot of times when what I think the origin of your question is from, and excuse me if I'm wrong, but it's sort of like the idea of a defensive reflex, right? Or defense mechanism, where we automatically think the worst of somebody just to protect our own self-esteem or something like that. And I think it's a little bit of a misnomer to consider those reflexes, like I've just said. I would just consider them, you know, behavioral tendencies. These are things we've learned to do. One stimulus sends an automatic process to our brain. We start engaging in the automatic process. And if our conscious system doesn't slow it down or change it or alter it, it'll just keep going. And that's what we do that all the time, actually, to almost everything.
That was kind of shocking for us.
Good. I'm here to shock and awe.
I guess we can move to the next question. I am asking that one. Okay, as students, we sometimes get exhausted by the rigorous curriculum, especially in our country, and even in high school. We feel anxiety for our future, and there are students around us who say they sink into a depression or about to sink into one. So, is it like a psychological myth, or these students are really about to sink into that depression? We kind of wonder that.
So you're cutting in and out a little bit. Is what a psychological myth?
Excuse me?
So you're cutting in and out a little bit, your audio. What did you ask was a psychological myth?
Okay, I asked the students think they're getting into a depression. So is it a psychological myth they're thinking, or they're really getting into a depression?
Oh, okay. So depression is a real thing, right? It's a real thing. And it's actually, you have to excuse me. So some of the stats I know, most of the stats I know are really from the USA. So just keep that in mind as I talk through this. But the majority of first onsets of depression, the first time you get depression, happens in late adolescence and early adulthood. Okay. So meaning that if you interview some random 40-year-old who has had depression in their lifetime, more often than not, their first time they had it was in childhood. That doesn't mean that everybody in childhood, adolescence and early adulthood gets depression, right? But it's just, that's how that stat works. So depression in adolescence, early adulthood is a very real thing. primarily because of how puberty works. So puberty is actually a great amplifier. That's what puberty does. It's like, anybody have, do you all drive, right? Drive cars or no?
Maybe some of us.
Some of us, okay. So let's say that you drive a car, right? All American teenagers drive cars, unfortunately. Unfortunately. So you drive a car, right? I want you to imagine, like, one day you're in this little 2-seater car that goes like 30 miles an hour, right? Puberty hits, and it's essentially putting a rocket on the back of your car. And you're like, okay, that's what the hormones do to teenagers' bodies. So it amplifies everything. And when you have someone who's maybe sensitive to stress, sensitive to loneliness, sensitive to feeling ostracized, right, or excluded socially, puberty amplifies those things and can lead to depression in adolescence fairly easily. Now, the flip side of this is here's the flip side. Although depression is a real thing, and it's a very important thing that we have to understand and consider, most people don't get depressed. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is that a lot of times we misuse the word depression and we use it as a placeholder for I'm really sad, or I'm maybe in grief, or I feel lonely. Okay. And those are very normal emotions that everybody feels. And those are, those suck, right? They're not great, but they're temporary and you tend to get over from them. Depression as a clinical disorder is another thing. It's not just those things, it's a whole suite of other physical body symptoms that are just different from that. Okay. So that's also really important, is I think we overuse the word depressed. Okay. So we should probably leave that word for I am clinically depressed. I need medicine and therapy and help, or else I'm spiraling out of control, versus I feel really sad. Okay.
Okay. Now it's our final question about psychology, and then we will make for some more question. Dilan will ask the final question about psychology.
Okay.
Hi, welcome again, and thank you for joining us with this interview. So I wrote the question in the chat box, so you can read it by yourself if you want or if you need. The question is, today we plan extraterrestrial colonies, especially in Mars. Some occupation groups like medical doctors are considered as essential for these colonies. What do you think of psychologists' role in this kind of colonies?
I love you all have very, very good questions. That is a brilliant question. I'll tell you, I'll answer it with a very, sort of not a story, but like another kind of stat, right, for you. So are you familiar with NASA? Okay, so the National Aeronautics Space Administration from the USA. NASA spends millions and millions and millions and millions, tens of millions and millions of dollars every year to give grants to people like me to study psychology and the impact of space travel and colonization. So to answer your question, yeah, they're very essential, because NASA realizes that you can't just put anybody up there. And in fact, I talked to some NASA officials, and they said that because I was reviewing some of these grants for them, and they said that there's tens of thousands of people apply to be astronauts and stuff like that, and if most of them do fine in the physical stuff, there's marathon runners and jujitsu people and whatever, right? They do fine. They're fit, their heart rate's good, their cholesterol's good. The way they really narrow them down is in the psychological. The people who are able to go to 100% and then past 100%, who are able to deprive themselves of basic things for months, to be able to withstand isolation for months. To just basically, it is so critical that they spend probably hundreds of millions of dollars on grants trying to look at this exact question. So yes, psychology, it's like doctors, horticulturists, right? Architects, psychologists. I mean, like, you know, that's what you're going to need. Good
Thanks for
question.
the answer. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, now with the Wake Forest questions, Nujan will ask the first question.
So at first, hi.
Hi.
As Shia told before, I'm gonna change the way of the question a bit, and I'm gonna turn my question to the Wake Forest University. So, as I know, Wake Forest University have a psychology major. So, does the university provide opportunities for students to enhance their studies? I mean, like internships or research?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I have about 12 or 13 undergraduate psychology majors right now in my lab doing research, attaching sensors to people, recording their emotions and their thoughts, stressing them out a little bit. And then some of those are part of the honors program where they do their own very special project for a year and a half. And with the idea of maybe being published someday. In fact, I've published several papers in psychology journals for real with honor students and other undergraduate students too. It is a very much of an emphasis for us that students get that hands-on research experience. Yes.
So thanks for answering.
Yep.
Okay, Yamu will ask the next question.
So to continue with the questions about Wake Forest University, what does Wake Forest University psychology alumni generally do? Do they pursue a medical career or go into graduate school or something else?
Yeah. So what I love about psychology is, besides the fact that everybody is interested in it to like be just a human being, is that it's really useful for a lot of careers. So a lot of our undergraduate students do go to graduate school in psychology. They go to graduate school in data science, because we have a very strong statistical program here as well. And a lot of them go to medical school. In fact, psychology is becoming a very popular major for pre-medical students. And that's mainly because, you know, medical schools are starting to look for a little bit more well-rounded person. They're starting to get worried about people who have only done chemistry and biology their whole lives. And then they come in and have to talk to patients and like try to tell them that they're dying, right? Can you imagine that? It's like, wait, I don't know what formula it is to tell someone that they're dying. But even more importantly though, is medical schools and doctors are really starting to realize how much psychology affects the body, and that you can have two people in two separate rooms suffering from the same physical ailment, but have completely different psychological makeups. And one person will have a very different trajectory than the other person. And they're realizing that. And they're realizing, you know, the brain is 30% of the body's blood. It's the most powerful organ in the body. Obviously, it controls everything. So why not try to understand it? So yeah, psychology majors are becoming very popular for all sorts of careers, including those. Also, business, marketing, and entrepreneurship is also really important too.
Okay, thank you for answering my question.
Okay, Paliansu will ask our last question for the Wake Forest University.
Okay, so my question is about the double major stuff. So my first question is, does Wake Forest allow students to choose double majors? And if so, what do psychology students tend to pick as their second major?
Oh, yeah, good question. So for sure, they allow double majors. And Wake Forest students are notoriously ambitious, ultra super ambitious. So they definitely do double majors, double major and a minor, you know. Some of them will make their own major. Okay, there's a program to allow you to do that. For psych majors, the ones who double major in psych, they do either psychology and biology. So these are sort of like your neuroscience people, your pre-med people. Psychology and health and exercise science. So these are also some pre-med people, but also like public health people who are really interested in that kind of thing. Psychology and let's see, what's that? Psychology and computer science is actually another popular one now. So this is like people who really want to know how to do computational modeling and social modeling and sort of bring those two together. Maybe people who want to work on not just coding, but coding for social media companies or companies that are interested in users and psychology of, you know, that sort of a thing, apps and all that stuff. Those are the big, and there's not as many psychology in business, just because business major takes a long time and it takes a lot of effort to do by itself. But yeah, those are the three big ones. And then obviously, the cool thing about psychology, it fits in with a lot of other random ones too, like music and Spanish and, you know, whatever else.
Thank you so much for answering my question.
Okay, we are moving to questions about you. I guess that was not enough about you. Okay, the first question is, was psychology your intended major when you got into college? You know, if it is or not, how did you decide to study psychology?
Yeah, so I wanted to undergraduate knowing that I wanted to do psychology. I really liked my psychology class in high school, and it sort of fit. And I wanted to be a scientist, but I was like I thought like chemistry and basic biology research was a little bit boring. You know, I don't want to be like a test tube person, but I wanted to be a scientist and I was interested in people. And I'm like, wait a second, psychology can be actually a science for real. So that's why I jumped in. I didn't really consider other things in college. I did get a minor in anthropology because I was really interested in like primates and you know, and sort of like evolutionary stuff, you know. So you know, I was and then I got almost a minor in biology. And I love philosophy too. I love philosophy classes too.
Oh, thank you so much for the answer. Our last question will come from Dilan again.
I think we already got the answer of this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because it's the last question. So I wrote it on the chat box again. You can read it if you need. The question is, if you were to pursue a second major, what would it be and why?
So what I'll do is I'll take that. I already answered that. So I'll answer a different question, which is if I was to pursue a second career, you know, what would I do and why, or what would I add? So one thing I like talking about psychology to people like yourself, to people who aren't necessarily students but who are just interested in it. So I always think it would be really fun to have like a TV show or be like a guest person on like the news shows, you know what I mean? Who like talks about psychology and kind of really communicates it to people and stuff like that, and interprets the science and stuff like that. I think that'd be really, really fun. I think I'd have to get a haircut, but I think I'd be pretty okay at it too. But that would be kind of like my second career, is really, you know, just talking about it with others. I'm also thinking about writing a book. So I think that'd be kind of fun too. Does that kind of get a little bit ish? If I could go back and take more classes though, I probably would have taken more philosophy. I really like philosophy.
Sarwan also really likes philosophy. I think he can speak a bit about philosophy, maybe, if he wants.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sarwan, do you want
I
to
couldn't get you, Dion.
I was
Can you
saying that,
repeat?
okay. So I was saying that you really love philosophy, right? Maybe you can speak a bit if
Yeah.
you want about philosophy.
All right. Well, I don't know enough about it to talk about it. That's why I say I wish I could have
So-
taken more.
So I actually started to like psychology very much too. I'm interested in economics, but I got into behavioral economics and your discipline gives so much insight to classical economics. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe I can ask a question if it's okay. If our moderators allow me to.
Yeah, we still have time. We have 4 minutes.
So how can we use psychology to construct better public policies? Like, what's the role of psychology in public policy framework? What do you think?
Beautiful question. I think there's lots of different ways, but the two that come to mind that I think about a lot are, one is recognizing what people really want. People say they want this thing, but at the end of the day, we want good relationships. We want to be healthy. We want to not have to worry about where our next meal is coming from, whether we're going to have medicine for our children or not. We just don't have to worry about that stuff. Ultimately, we don't really want $10 billion a year. We don't really want that. We want, especially if it costs us these other things. So really getting the understanding of, like, at the end of the day, what do people really want I think is a really important part that psychology can play. And the other one is, how do you predict what people are going to do, right? With policy changes. I think a lot of times we live in this little bubble where we think of people like these perfect little automatons, and like, if you do this thing, of course they'll just like follow. Boop, 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 okay. We forget that they're humans with their own desires and emotions, and that they have their own way of making decisions, their own way of filtering information. And when we forget that, we kind of lose them. And the policy doesn't, it's just, it doesn't work. It doesn't matter how brilliant it is, it doesn't work. The world is filled with hundreds and hundreds of brilliant tomes and books of really interesting theoretical ideas for how a society should work, that when put into practice fail, because they were not written taking into account human beings, or they're written only taking into account one specific type of human being and not everybody else. At the end of the day, we're kind of chimpanzees, right? We're just fighting for resources, trying to survive, and we're going to kind of do whatever it takes to do that. We're not all like super hyper intellectual things that perfectly balance A and B against each other in a very hyper rational state. We don't do that. That's not what we do. So policies that assume that are going to fail.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
We have got another question from the audience. Microphone. He asked for if you have any suggestion of books. For example, if you are interested in these questions and the answers, we may read some of the books. And there's a specific question about the book. Have you read Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces?
Oh, so to be fair, and this is a little embarrassing, I spend all my days reading journal articles and science articles, and I don't read a lot of books that are for public consumption. I read more like hard science stuff. So I have trouble. I'm not really the right person to suggest books, unfortunately. It's a little bit of a blind spot. Most of the times because I get annoyed at books, because I'm like, wait a second, that's an oversimplification. Blah, 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 blah. So I mainly, if I read a book, it's about other stuff like quantum physics or philosophy or history or something funky. I don't really read psychology books. So sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. We are running out of time, and we'd like to thank you so much for coming in today and having
Thanks.
a talk with us. It was really nice.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Okay.
Thanks.
So just leave now.
Yeah. Bye.
See you.
Yes.
All right, bye.